Hi everyone, welcome to Read 516 Week 3. I hope you guys survived all the reading and the forum discussions for Week 2. This should be kind of a lighter week, so I'm very thankful for that. So let's go over your upcoming assignments. So Week 3 readings. You have Lipson and Wixon Chapter 7, and I forgot to write down the pages, but I believe it's 301 to 373. So it's basically the whole chapter, which I know it's kind of long, but it does, again, focus on working with a young reader. Core, page 19 to 33. So this is also important, but it's not as heavy as a reading as your Lipson and Wixon. It goes over some phonemic awareness assessments that you will be giving to your student. So make sure to carefully read those and how to administer them. Article 1, assessing motivation to read. And Article 2, anecdotal records assessment. And we'll kind of go over that today in the lecture. All right, participation activities for this week are none. So I'm pretty sure you're excited about that, but one of the reasons why I planned that was because I really wanted you to focus on learning some of the assessments that you will be giving to your student and also getting that WAPR prepared, only the planned portion. So your assignments due are the planned portion of your WAPR, due 9/11 in class, and I think I mentioned this before, but I will not be collecting this. This is something that you need to have ready for your student, and I will be going around kind of to make sure that you guys are following your plan. And your fieldwork requirement, if you haven't submitted it already. This is something that was due last week, but please, 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 if you have not turned it in, you need to get that in before you work with your student. And also, please note, as a reminder, that late assignments will be reduced by 1 grade and will not be accepted 1 week past due date. Okay, so moving on to our lecture. We're going to be going over some informal assessments, classroom-based and structured. Please note that the classroom-based is mostly focused on formative and diagnostic assessment, and then we're also going to discuss anecdotal records. Okay, so our session objectives. We're going to compare and contrast formative and diagnostic assessments with structured informal assessments. And we're going to describe anecdotal records assessment. So my goal is to get this in within 15 minutes before my cutoff. So let's get going. All right, so Chapter 8 discusses structured inventories and assessments. These are informal assessments and they can be used more flexibly. So you can kind of modify different parts of the administration in order to get more information about your students' literacy skills, but also be aware that once you do modify things, it may not be as valid and reliable as you want it to be. These are often used for interim or benchmark, so 3 to 4 times a year. So your school may actually have some mandated that everyone takes to kind of monitor student progress and achievement across the school year. It is not to be confused with formal tests designed to compare a student's score to that of other students. So we discussed norm reference before, so these are not norm referenced. However, they are designed to evaluate a student's performance against criteria for acceptable performance, so criterion referenced. And again, we discussed what criterion references was last week. So in Chapter 8, they kind of go in depth with the IRI. And one of the things they did mention was it would indicate students' level of frustration, independent, and instructional. So they have to meet a certain percentage to get into those specific areas. One of the key features is authenticity. So it mimics classroom reading instructions, so they are more generalizable than formal assessment. So when we do formal assessments with our students, generally they do activities that are farther removed from classroom practices. However, structured inventories and assessments, like here, they mimic classroom reading instructions so we can make a more generalized view of the student's abilities. And they contain specific procedures and materials to ensure consistent assessment practices. So that's the structured portion of it. Examples of structured assessments are the informal reading inventories. So there's a bunch of IRIs that you can give. You will be giving your student one later, so we'll be discussing that in depth at a later session. We'll kind of do a brief overview here. There's also some tests for adolescents. I'm not too familiar with these, but the book goes over them in detail. The reading miscue inventory. There's an oral reading fluency, word lists, spelling inventories. So also important to note things like word lists and spelling inventories. These actually assess reading skills in isolation. It doesn't mean that they're not a useful tool, but it's important to note that we want to use these in addition to other assessments when prescribing an intervention for your student. Okay, so here's our brief overview of informal reading inventories. They're individually administered reading tests composed of a series of graded word lists and graded passages. So, okay, by the way, if you hear some noise in the background, that's my dog, and I'm not going to re-record it. He's like coughing up something. Sorry about that. Anyways, I know it's kind of hard for you to picture what an IRI is right now if you haven't administered it before, but it's kind of a lengthy assessment. And it's first the student has to read a graded word list to see what level he or she is at, and then they read a passage depending on their level of the word list. And then with the IRI, you're trying to find the student's instructional level, frustration level, and independent level. And this is very useful when matching the student with text. Oh, here we go. So with their appropriate levels. And it can also help identify strengths and weaknesses in areas of word recognition and comprehension. Okay, so moving forward to Chapter 9, which is Formative and Diagnostic Assessment. When I think about this type of assessment, I think about the RTI process and how we do a general benchmark of all the students or a screening, and then we identify students who need further assistance in a certain area. And here's when formative and diagnostic assessment would play an important part, because this would hone in on a skill or a variety of skills that maybe the student needs more instruction with. So these focus on assessment strategies that help a teacher or evaluator gather more comprehensive and or diagnostic information. So this is basically what you'll be doing with your student. You are going to be administering diagnostic assessments to get more information about your student's needs. Okay, so this is also ideal for the RTI process, as mentioned before, specifically diagnostic assessments, because you can really start to gather more information about your student and what skill areas, such as word recognition, decoding, comprehension, phonics, phonemic awareness. And I also see it playing an important role when you're trying to figure out what kind of groupings you want to have within your classroom. So that can definitely help you there. Okay, so this is the opposite of norm reference standardized test, as we discussed before. It's tied to curricular content and instruction happening in the classroom. More fine-grained than external assessment, which helps teachers plan lessons. Focus on both the product and the process of learning. Give teachers immediate feedback. Enable teachers to interact with the students and consequently adapt the assessment to the individual learner. And these types of assessments can be very powerful because unlike formal assessments, you can collect data more frequently, especially with formative assessments, because formal assessments tend to be done periodically throughout the year, as opposed to this is just an ongoing way of collecting data from your students. So some examples of formative and diagnostic assessments: running records during oral reading, 1-minute time fluency assessments, word sorts, teacher-made tests, retellings, questioning, evaluating written products, observation checklists. So think about it. Think about how you might use these in your classroom. And I'm sure you already use some formative assessments every single day, whether you know it or not. You're constantly gathering data about your students, and that's helping you drive your instruction, and especially on the spot. So teachers are very good at gathering information about whether the students understand it or not, and knowing whether they need to reteach it, to challenge them, or to go in a different direction. And also important to note that assessments are only formative when the information is used to guide and adapt your instruction to meet the student's needs. And in page 448, there gives a really good summary of different types of assessments. Okay, so here's a quote that I actually really like. Teachers need assessment tools that help them become noticing teachers. How can you become a noticing teacher? Plan assessment type and kind strategically. Listen. So this is not just only listening to the child talk to you, but also listening to how the student interacts with other people around them, especially during the classroom. What kind of conversation is the student having? Does the student use academic language? Is the student embarrassed to talk about things to you or to his peers? So listening is a very powerful tool for a noticing teacher. Recognizing patterns. Reflect and plan. Look beyond skill mastery. Let me go back. I think sometimes some of the hardest ones to do is being able to recognize patterns, because we don't want to look at things in isolation. When a student produces something and we notice something on that, maybe assessment, we're not going to only want to look there. We're going to want to look at a variety of things that the student has done and see if we see patterns, because this can often offer very good insight to what the student is thinking and some of the strengths and needs that the child may have. Okay, and as always, assessments do have some limitations. Beware of informal assessments that assess skills in isolation. It doesn't mean you can't use those assessments, but make sure you are gathering other measures. Okay, so beware of tests that assume reading is a hierarchical process. I have a hard time saying that word for some reason. Need to have a relationship between how reading and writing is assessed and how it is produced. Make sure you have multiple sources. And again, this kind of goes back to here. So you can't just use one assessment to make a generalization. And the bottom line, although screening and structured inventories can provide very good data, a more elaborate assessment of strengths and needs will generally make instruction more effective for struggling readers and writers. So again, with the whole screening process and the structured inventories, yes, that can give us good information, but if we notice that there's a group of students needing more attention, we need to go deeper.